Welcome to episode 38 of Norse Myths, Legends, and Folktales. My name is MyLinda, Butterworth, and today we learn how Loki devises a plan to rid himself of Baldur using his innocent brother as his tool, in part 2 of the death of Baldur. As soon as he was quite certain he was alone, the shape changer muttered the magic words. Then, crowing, he resumed his old form, Loki again. Jauntily, the trickster walked across the plain of Idalvoll, deserted now, except for the animals that stood in motionless groups as if they were waiting or had never moved. The air was thickening. The distance and middle distance were blurred and bluish. It was almost night. Loki hurried past Gladsheim. He hurried towards Valhalla and smiled to himself as he heard the Einherjar shouting. He hurried on west in the fading light, whistling and looking sharply to left and right and under his feet. Then he entered a small grove, and there rooted neither in earth nor water, but growing out of the trunk of an old oak, the sly one found what he had come for, the spray of mistletoe. Its berries gleamed like clusters of pale eyes. Its leaves were green and yellow-green. Its stems and small branches and twigs were green. Unmoving and otherworldly, it seemed in broad daylight, and even more strange now in the half-light. Loki grabbed at the little bush and wrenched it until it came away from the oak. Then he left the grove and took the path to Gladsheim, picking at the spray as he hurried along. He chose the straightest branch, almost as long as his forearm, and stripped it down, leaving a small trail of droppings behind him. Loki sharpened one end of it. He stropped it against his belt and stepped into the warm light of the hall. The gathering in Gladsheim was so caught up in the game they were playing that no one was aware Loki had gone, and no one noticed he had come back again. The sly one looked around. He smiled when he saw that Frigg had joined the company. His lips tightened and his eyes narrowed as he watched blind Hod, Baldur's brother, standing a little aside as usual, pathetic in his slow, fumbling movements. And when Loki saw that many of the gods were once again hurling darts at long-suffering Baldur, he doubled up. For a moment his whole body was convulsed, as if in laughter or terrible pain. The servant hurried up and offered Loki wine. Loki drained the cup at one draught, and then sauntered across the spacious hall behind the semicircle of the gods and their followers. He sidled up to Hod and poked him in the ribs. "That can only be Loki," said Hod. "None other," said a voice in his ear. "Well," said Hod, "why don't you join in? Why aren't you throwing darts at your brother?" "Because I can't see where he is," said Hod. Loki sucked his cheeks. "Another thing," said Hod, "I have no weapon." "This is not as it should be," said Loki with measured indignation. "They do wrong to ignore you, and you his brother." Hod's expression did not alter. He had long since learned to accept his fate. "Nothing comes," he said, "of wrangling resentment." Hod's words were drowned in a roar of laughter. "What was that?" he asked. "Only one of the same," said Loki. "A dart well aimed, but now it's your turn, Hod. You should pay your respects to Baldur like everyone else." "I have no weapon," Hod repeated. "Take this twig then," said Loki, and he put the sharpened mistletoe between Hod's hands. "I'll show you where he's standing. I'll stand behind you and guide your hand." Loki's eyes were on fire now. His whole body was on fire. His face was ravaged by wolfish evil and hunger. Hod grasped the mistletoe and lifted his right arm. Guided by Loki, he aimed the dart at his brother Baldur. The mistletoe flew through the hall, and it struck Baldur. It pierced him and passed right through him. The god fell on his face. He was dead. There was no sound in Gladsheim. No sound, only the roaring of silence. The gods could not speak. They looked at the fairest and most wise of them all, shining and lifeless, and they could not even move from where they stood to lift him. The gods stared at each other, and then they turned to stare at Hod and Loki. They had no doubt. They were all of one mind about who had caused Baldur's death, and yet none of them were able to take vengeance. The ground of Gladsheim was hallowed, and no one was ready to shed blood in the sanctuary. Hod could not see the fearsome gaze of that gathering. Loki could not withstand it. He loped towards the doors of Gladsheim and slunk away into the darkness. Then the terrible silence was broken. One goddess began to weep, seized by wild grief, and the weeping of one unlocked the floodgates of them all. When they tried to speak, they found they could not tell their grief, and their words were choked with tears. Odin himself was there, and of all the gods and goddesses, he was the most deeply affected. He was best understood that this was the greatest evil ever sustained by gods and men, and foresaw what loss and sorrow would follow in the wake of his son's death. Frigg was the first to speak. "Does anyone," she asked, "does anyone here want to win all my love and favor?" The mourning company turned to face her. "Is there anyone here who will ride the long road to hell and try to find Baldur?" Then the goddesses buried their faces in their hands and sobbed again. "Is there anyone," said Frigg, her voice rising, "who will offer hell a ransom? Offer her a ransom if she'll allow my son Baldur to come home to Asgard again." Then Hermod stepped forward, Odin's son, whom everyone admired for his boldness. "I will," he said. "I am ready to go." Gladsheim began to breathe and sound again. Odin gave servants orders. They hurried out of the hall and soon returned with Sleipnir, Odin's own horse. Allfather took the reins and handed them to Hermod. Then, in Gladsheim, Hermod mounted Sleipnir. He looked down at the upturned faces of the gods and the goddesses, and at all the fair fallen body of Baldur. He raised his hand and spurred the steed. Sleipnir's hooves clattered against the marble floor. Hermod galloped out into the darkness and on towards the endless night. The gods and the goddesses did not sleep. They kept a silent vigil in Gladsheim, ranged around Baldur's body, so white that it was gleaming. Each of them was prey to his own thoughts and hopes and fears. What chance Hermod had of bringing Baldur back from the dead? How to avenge Baldur's death on his own unhappy brother Hod? What kind of punishment would begin to suffice for Loki, and what meaning the death of one must have for them all? And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy.